Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? On its face, streaming music seems like a really good value. But in the long term, is it actually going to do more harm than good? So for a long time, I have totally relied on a local music library. By that, I mean I have all of my CDs ripped as MP3 or lossless files, and I make heavy use of organizing them, storing them on the hard drive of my computer, backing them up, copying them to my devices when I want to listen to that music, making sure that I've got all the albums and everything that I want, like say on my phone or on a flash drive for in the car, that sort of thing. And I've got, a pretty well-defined music library that I like, and I know I can take it with me and use however I want. But obviously the industry has been headed more and more towards the concept of streaming music. We're talking services like Apple Music and Spotify and Tidal, to some lesser extent, Amazon and Google and Pandora, a whole host of other services as well. But the whole idea is you don't really own the music anymore. You don't have local copies of it so much anymore that you can move from device to device and basically do whatever you want with. You just launch an app and suddenly all of that music is there and you can just listen to it whenever you want. And if you look at it from purely a financial perspective, it makes a ton of sense. There's actually a whole lot going for the streaming music model, simply because, if nothing else, the price is right. The vast majority of these services run about $10 a month, and $10 a month, when you think about it, really isn't a whole ton of money, especially compared to how much you could be spending if you were going out and buying all of the different music you had available to you. So the average price for an album here in the United States is somewhere around $12 to $13. So if you figure, maybe you buy a new album of music once a month, you're already financially way ahead if you just switch to streaming, because not only would you have access to that album, you'd have access to practically infinite supply of music otherwise. Definitely more than you'd ever be able to listen to probably in your lifetime. So $10 a month, really, it's a very compelling option. And that's pretty clearly the reason why streaming is really taking off. I mean, these services have millions of subscribers. Last time I checked, I believe Spotify is up to something like 60 million subscribers. Apple Music is up to 30 million subscribers. Tidal we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, but their numbers are definitely a lot lower and questionable, let's just say. But still, you've got lots of people buying into the concept of streaming, and it's definitely pushed the record industry in that direction. In fact, the record industry likes streaming because it's been causing their profits to go up. In fact, profits for the last few years within the record industry have grown at pretty substantial rates. So clearly it's a good thing for consumers because it gives them really good value for their money, but it's also a good thing for the record industry because now they're making more money. So streaming makes a ton of sense. And, like I said, I've really heavily relied on my own library of music. A few years ago, I went and re-ripped all of my CDs again, this time to lossless format, because I want to be future thinking with all of my music, where if a new compressed music format comes out that offers even better quality at even smaller file sizes or whatever, I don't have to dig all the CDs back out of storage and re-rip them again. It's pretty time consuming, especially when you need to go and get album artwork and categorize stuff and all of that. So having that already done in streaming format for you makes a lot of sense. And I finally kind of bit the bullet not too long ago and didn't give up necessarily on my own kind of local library, but I'm giving streaming a real solid try. Now, not to say that I haven't been trying streaming music before. I'm not living under a rock. It's been around for several years. But the way I'm trying to use streaming, for me at least, has changed. Towards the end of 2017, Spotify offered a deal where you could get 3 months of its premium service for $1. No ads, unlimited skips. You can listen to all the music that you want. You get access to some advanced features. I figured, you know what, 3 months for $1 just to give it a try. Why not? There's very little to lose, right? So I signed up for it, and I've really been giving it a shot. Whenever I want to listen to music, I've been trying to remind myself to look for it on Spotify first, right? See if it's out there. Always try to have that be my first option to see, could I ever actually make that switch, give up on my local library and say, you know what, screw it, for $10 a month. It's worth, if nothing else, the peace of mind of knowing that I don't have to worry about backing up and copying these files and making sure that I've got what I want on my device when I want it, that kind of thing. So I've been trying that for a little over a month now. And I've found that there are some definite strengths and some definite weaknesses to going all in on streaming music. So the strengths, obviously, is you have this huge library of music available to you. And I'm looking at it from the model of where you've got on-demand full albums available, not necessarily so much the whole internet radio station type of approach, maybe like Pandora does, where you can't just pick an album and listen through the whole thing, or, I want to listen to this exact song right now and find it and play it. Some of those services are more of like an internet radio station where, you might be able to pick a genre, you might be able to pick a favorite artist, and then they algorithmically come up with other singles to play for you in sequence, and you might be able to skip the ones you don't like, that sort of thing. But clearly the industry is headed in the direction of really more kind of like the way Netflix and other video streaming services do it, where you've just got this catalog sitting there waiting for you. All you have to do is go find it and then tap on what you want to play. So there's no kind of, listen to internet radio and hope your favorite song comes up type of thing. It's like you've got this gigantic iTunes library just sitting there with all the music in the world waiting for you to play it. And there's a very appealing aspect to that. I've been able to listen to artists that I otherwise wouldn't have easily been able to get access to, or at least be able to check them out and see, do I like it? I'm at the point where I'm starting to try to be in the mindset of, if I'm out like at a store or at a restaurant or whatever, and I hear a song that sounds interesting that I never heard before, I've been trying to make a habit of like firing up Shazam and figuring out what that song is. And incidentally, Shazam has some really interesting tie-ins with Spotify where you can just add that song directly to a playlist or whatever so you can find it again later. So I've discovered a whole bunch of new artists and music that I otherwise wouldn't have easily had access to if I always went down the path of, if I want to get new music, I need to go find it and buy it. It's like, yeah, places like the Amazon Music Store and the iTunes Music Store, you can get previews and stuff, but previews really don't necessarily give you the full picture of an album. It's a lot easier for me to just find an artist that I like or that I just heard of and, okay, well, this one song that I heard in the store or whatever is on this album. What the hell? I'll spend an hour and just listen through the whole album. You know what I mean? So the idea of having all of that music just there, ready for you to listen to it, is fantastic. And likewise, the same thing with the curated, streams, like internet radio type of thing, which Spotify kind of does too, where you may just be in the mood for a certain genre of music. Maybe I just want to listen to stuff from the 80s or the 90s, or a certain genre other than a time period. I want to listen to music that sounds like a certain artist. You can discover whole lots of new music that way, or listen to stuff that's really familiar to you that you never really bothered to collect. If you just feel like listening to a whole bunch of singles, hey, it's right there. Tap a button and off you go. You have your own radio station now. So it's really a great value. But as I've been going through it, I've found some frustrations, not only in the short term, but I'm also a little bit worried about the ramifications of this kind of model in the long term. Now, I don't mean to go into this kind of spelling, doom and gloom and, oh, we should get rid of all the streaming music or anything like that. But I'm not 100% convinced that streaming music as it is right now is necessarily going to completely replace the traditional, in quotes, ownership model for music. Now, I should back up a second and say that, when you go and buy, say, a CD or a vinyl record or whatever, you may own that physical thing. However, when it comes to the music itself, what you're really doing is just buying a license, right? You can't do whatever you want with it. You can't fire off multiple copies of that and hand them out to friends or anything like that. You do have some limitations as to what you can do with it. However, the thing is, they can't necessarily take that physical format away from you. You can continue to listen to that in its format, or even in some case format, shift it to another format, and they can't do nothing about it, right? The music industry, they've kind of given up control to some extent of that music when you go and actually buy it. And like what I've been doing with my own music collection, ripping CDs to lossless for, future-proofing it effectively, I'm preventing myself from ever ending up in a situation where I necessarily, have to buy that music again, where I will always have that as it is. And I don't have to worry about, 20 years from now, if a new format comes out, I'm not necessarily going to be able to have access to that music on that new format. Maybe it's, a little bit more of an esoteric kind of artist, and it flew under the radar even during its time, when that artist was, relatively new and it's their CD or vinyl record or whatever was produced. We see that with movies too, where, say there are these kind of cult classic movies that only ever came out on DVD and they haven't come out on Blu-ray, or only ever came out on like VHS or Laserdisc, never even made it to DVD, that sort of thing. From, in some ways, kind of a cultural heritage perspective, I guess you could say, the loss of music ownership is a little bit risky, because is all of this more esoteric kind of stuff gonna make it to a streaming platform? Maybe yes, maybe no. I suspect in any situation, some of it's going to kind of slip through the cracks. So by continuing to have music available on physical format, in a purchasable format, at least you're kind of future-proofing yourself, where no, you may not be able to play it on the newest, latest, greatest equipment, but you still got your old equipment and the old format, and there's nothing that stops you from firing it up. So, the one of the big worries that I have with streaming is there's this continual technological march forward. All these streaming services really rely on apps and the internet, and there's nothing that prevents those services from deprecating old devices. Saying, hey, we're no longer supporting the older versions of iOS or Android or Windows or Mac or whatever. Saying, as of this date, you have to move on to a new thing. Well, effectively, that's kind of the same deal as saying, this artist, we released their album on vinyl, but we're not going to release it on CD or something like that, where you're kind of stuck in the past, but they're forcibly taking that past away from you because the app just won't work after they drop support for it. They'll make it stop working. So it's kind of like the idea of you have to keep up with the new technology, which is understandable when it comes to new music, right? We've seen this. There have been, new artists and albums and stuff that have been released after, say, cassettes and vinyl records, dramatically dropped in popularity. Their album maybe only ever came out on CD format. There are new albums that only ever come out in some sort of digital format like MP3s or whatever, where they never even saw like a digital physical release. And you have to buy new equipment, technology in order to play that. And that's fine, but cutting out all the older stuff, it's almost like the same thing as saying, you know what, the past doesn't matter anymore. We're cutting out history. We're erasing portions of history. And that just kind of rubs me the wrong way, especially considering there are some parallels there with retro gaming, right? It'd be the same thing as, you know, all of these new games that we've been seeing that are digital download only, you know, maybe. Are those going to stop working someday? Well, if they're download and they're on the hard drive of your PlayStation or Xbox or whatever, well, at least they'll probably survive as long as that hardware works. But are those games going to make it to a next platform? Are they going to get continually ported to the new platform? Or are new platforms going to offer, you know, backward compatibility kind of support where you can keep playing these older games on new technology? I don't know. And that's something that the retro gaming aficionados are definitely worried about. So there's that historical aspect to it. There's a much more practical aspect to it as well. Whereas if I go and buy a CD or even just buy, you know, the MP3 or AAC version of an album, pay my 12 or 13 bucks, download it to my hard drive, or, you know, come home from the store with the CD in my hand, I have that and I can listen to it without having to pay any more money. With streaming, you're on the hook every month. If you want to listen to the same song every day, you can with streaming, but as soon as you stop paying, you suddenly lose access to that. Whereas you buy it once, you own it forever. So even if you're willing to, you know, continue to rock the old antiquated equipment years and years from now, you can still listen to what you paid for. So whether that makes sense for people financially or not really just kind of comes down to how much new music they ever want to listen to, or just how much music they listen to in general. I would say for the average person, it probably still makes sense to go with streaming, but I don't necessarily want the average person's needs to cut out the desire for those of us who maybe listen to a lot of new music or just listen to a lot of music in general. You know, being able to buy what we want to listen to and not worry about will it be there tomorrow. You know, just because somebody only fires up Spotify for, you know, a couple hours a week or a couple hours a month or whatever, I don't think that behavior should necessarily dictate the entirety of the market. So that's another concern. It's just that loss of, again, in quotes, ownership, even though when you buy, you know, an album, you don't necessarily own it. But likewise, there's also, you know, kind of this lowest common denominator approach, not just with that whole loss of ownership, but also with the loss of flexibility. So one group that I don't necessarily consider myself part of, but I know there are plenty of them out there, are audiophiles. A lot of these streaming services don't necessarily support really, really high quality audio. Some of them have some options, like with Spotify, you can turn on high quality streaming support, but that's not lossless. That's still compressed audio. As far as I can tell, regular Spotify audio is about 160 kilobits per second. When you go in there and turn on high quality mode, it only bumps it up to 320 kilobit per second. So it's still compressed. If you've got really, really good equipment, you're probably going to notice the difference. How many people are like that? Not that many, admittedly. And there are some services that do cater to people like that. Tidal actually is one of them, where they've got a lossless audio tier. But Tidal is a very small player, and I'd be curious to read the statistics, if they were to ever publish them, as to how many people actually took advantage of that lossless audio format versus just the regular compressed audio to save bandwidth, that sort of thing. So, you know, if the music industry goes entirely streaming, there are going to definitely be some people who are left out in that regard, just from a technical angle of it, trying to cater to the masses. One of the other big concerns, and this is probably the biggest concern, and unfortunately it's, I suspect, going to mirror kind of what we've been seeing with streaming video, and that all has to do with availability of content and exclusivity and contracts. Contract disputes and loss of contracts ending, that sort of thing is something that we're actually very used to with the streaming video, to the point where there are sites that categorize and notify people about all the new stuff that's, say, coming to Netflix that month, and then all the old stuff that's leaving Netflix that month. Simply because contracts expire, and in the negotiations they break down. The studios or whoever want more money than Netflix is willing to pay. So they basically both just say screw you to each other, and suddenly that content disappears. I'm worried that the same thing really is going to be happening with the streaming music industry, where we'll see, a major label has a deal with, Spotify, where, okay, you pay us X amount of money per listen on these songs for the next 2 years. But when those 2 years come up, maybe the recording industry or that particular label or whatever says, you know what, we want to make more money off of this. And the streaming service says, well, look, we can't afford to pay you more of it, or we don't want to pay you more of it, or whatever. What's to say that entire artists, many artists worth of music, won't just disappear at some point from that streaming service simply because of a contract negotiation that broke down? So there's always that threat. One of your favorite artists, you may be on a streaming service that financially makes a ton of sense, $10 a month or whatever. It's got all the artists that you like to listen to, seems to be working really well for you, and then you tune in one day and suddenly like half of it's gone. That would be really disconcerting and very frustrating, to have that rug kind of pulled out from under you due to nothing that you yourself did. Likewise, there's also the concern of exclusivity, right? Where you've got artists that are launching new music on specific platforms. So far, it's always just been temporarily, right? Where a new album will launch on, say, Apple Music for a week exclusively, and then it'll show up on the other streaming platforms. But that's not necessarily meaning that it's not going to turn like permanent in the future, right? There very well can be artists that say, you know what, I'm going to sign a deal with this one particular streaming platform, and that's the only place my music will be. And if they're a really popular artist, well, that's going to drive people to switch platforms. But what happens if multiple of your favorite artists start doing that, but they're all on different platforms? So now it's kind of going in the model where you need to subscribe to multiple services. We've kind of started to see this happen with video. Video, surprisingly enough, is actually a bit ahead of the music industry when it comes to streaming. Usually audio, from a technical perspective, is a little bit more advanced than video. The video industry seems to, more often than not, kind of lag behind the music industry. But in this situation, it's flipped around. So the whole idea behind Netflix and Hulu and all of those video services was to basically kill cable TV. And they're doing a pretty good job of that. But we've started to see this whole exclusivity thing happen, where studios will only sign deals with a specific streaming platform for specific content, and that's where it is. So if you want to watch a lot of the stuff you want to watch, you have to subscribe to multiple platforms. The idea behind streaming video to begin with was, hey, it's going to save you a bunch of money. You can dump that cable bill that's costing you $60, $80 a month, if not more. Our service is only 10 or 12 or 15 bucks a month. We've got tons of content, switch to Netflix or Hulu or whatever. But now we're at the point where you have to subscribe to multiple platforms just to get a more complete picture of content. The worry is that same thing is going to happen to music. And when that does happen, the financial incentive for consumers is going to start to become less and less, right? Right now, if you only need to subscribe to one platform, it's a much better deal than if you go out and buy new music a lot. But if you have to subscribe to multiple platforms, if you're into it for 20 or 30 bucks a month now, well, if you don't buy new music all that often, suddenly just going to the store and buying the CD for 12 or 13 bucks is starting to make a bit more sense. Or just buying the single, as a digital download for 99 cents or whatever it is, $1.29. So that's a big concern, is that the industry may get greedy, I guess you could say, where they decide They want to extract more money out of it. And admittedly, the per stream rate on music is very low. And this is a contentious issue that we see a lot. Fairly frequently, I'll see news articles come up about, this industry executive in the recording industry is all pissed off because artists aren't getting paid enough, and the artists themselves are saying they're not getting paid enough off of streaming. That's, that sort of stuff. Are people really going to stick with it if they're in for 30 or 40 bucks a month just to listen to their favorite artists? I'm not so sure. I mean, one thing that streaming really did was kill piracy, or at least dramatically reduce piracy. For 10 bucks a month, that's a really low price to pay to save you all that hassle and effort of seeking out, all the music you want to listen to and just pirating it. So that, I think, is really where the major profits that the recording industry has been seeing in the last few years are coming from. It's not necessarily that this is expanding their market, but rather it's making up for the loss of revenue that they've seen for the past, probably almost 2 decades due to piracy, So by fragmenting the market, is that really going to do anybody any good? And the bigger concern, just beyond fragmenting the market between like 2 or 3 major services that are otherwise independent, would be, what if the labels themselves start getting into pulling out of these larger kind of aggregate services like Pandora, like Spotify, like Apple Music, and just launching their own service instead, So now you're getting nickeled and dimed to death even more. And that's ultimately going to turn more and more people off. It's going to fragment and isolate the market even more. It's going to turn people into haves and have-nots. And it's also really going to kind of stifle the expansion of music. I mean, one of the biggest things that I love about streaming music is the fact that not only do I, like I said, get that opportunity to listen to, artists that maybe I've been interested in but haven't been willing to commit on buying an album from, but it also gives me really wide exposure to all these indie artists, all these indie musicians. The barrier to entry to get your music in front of a lot of people is very low because of these streaming services. So like when I go and try and find new music for my own YouTube channels, like for background music, I discover a lot of artists actually through these streaming services. And even if I find them on a platform like SoundCloud, a lot of time those artists will also have a link where you can listen to them on Spotify. So it's ultimately helping the industry by, in some ways, having a semi-monopoly, right? You may think, well, more choices are better in terms of these platforms, and generally they are. But having, maybe 2 or 3 major services that are otherwise equal in terms of the content they carry could actually be a good thing, because now you've got a fairly common way for all of these new musicians who the large labels may not otherwise even want to, have anything to do with. It at least gives them an option to get their music out there and in front of people. I mean, these services, and even, I guess in some ways you could say YouTube is a streaming music service in and of its own right. A lot of new musicians these days that make it big have actually found their start by doing things like uploading their own tracks to SoundCloud, or by uploading their music to YouTube and getting discovered that way. It's not so much you have to, know the right people and get an audition at the right time or whatever, like it was 20 something years ago to get into the music industry professionally and make it big. It's kind of becoming democratized a little more, and that's really exciting. So I don't want to come across as being like, the old man, get off my lawn, I don't like this streaming crap, anything like that. But I think it has to say consumer friendly. I don't think greed on the part of the music industry is going to do anybody any good. And it'll ultimately, I think, only be their own downfall if they push too far that way. My only hope is that all of this stuff gets realized before any of that damage occurs. I can only hope that, kind of the way things are now, where we've got a few really big services that work well, is the way that it stays, and that the industry finds the way to achieve the profitability that it needs, but not necessarily wants. Because if you go by what they want, well, they want to own the entire universe, right? That's the way every business operates. But trying to find that nice equilibrium between a good value for consumers and being able to, pay artists a decent rate, having the industry stay stable, I really think that's going to be the best path going forward. I can only hope that we figure out a way to do that. So I'm, of course, curious as to your thoughts. Are you heavily invested in streaming music? Have you gone exclusively that way? Or is it more of kind of a hybrid approach like what I've been doing, where you've got your own music library of the stuff that you really like, but the streaming music is really more just kind of a supplement at times? Just curious as to what you think, so be sure to leave your thoughts and everything down in the comments below. Also, if you're curious and interested in an audio-only version of these podcasts, I have them available for Patreon supporters at all contribution levels. They're just plain MP3 downloads. They're usually available a few days early, and it supports an RSS feed, so you can throw them into your podcast player of choice. Just something to think about. Anyway, if you like this one, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.